Happy birthday. Are we going to sing happy birthday? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Oh, y'all. Doc, he's here. He's here. I'm sorry. Was there anybody in May that we missed? A May birthday? Okay, we got something for you. Dick, we have another present up here. Okay. Now, before we go any further, we have door prizes, and so there are two people that have a picture of a heart on the front of their programs. Who is that? Raise your hand if you've got a heart on your program. Casey. Okay. Who else has got a heart on the front of their program? Raise your hand. Okay. Okay, Dick, you see the red, white, and blue one? Okay, everybody's got on red, white, and blue. We got him. We got him. Yep. Okay. Don't forget that the Christmas basket, gift basket, is up front where you pay your money. We put that money in there, and that goes for gifts for kids. If you know of any members that have been having health issues or death in their family, please contact Shirley Scully. Shirley, where's Shirley? Or Joan Noggle about that. All right, and then at the once again, Dot is busy taking calls for people making their reservations. If you make a reservation and you don't come, you have to pay. So if you're going to come, please make a reservation and do it the sooner the better. Usually it's due the Sunday before we come. So next month is June 26th. Okay, and then afterwards we're going to ask everybody to help us clean up the tables as usual. And so we're going to go ahead and, there's our guest speaker.
Where? Have you prayed yet?
Yes, I have. I prayed that you would get here.
I have a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old.
Enough said.
One is learning to drive and the other is writing a research paper. So pray again.
All right. Well, we're gonna call tables by twos. So one set goes over here and one set goes over here. Got it? So the first group is table 1 and table 10. So y'all go over there, and table 1 go over here, which is. Okay. Okay, table 13 and table 11. 13 goes over here, 11 goes over here. Were y'all 11 or 13? Were y'all not following directions? Nobody was following directions. I know. Sorry. That's the way the dice fell. After everybody else eats. Table 12. Where's table 12? Y'all go over here. Table 3. Where's table 3? Table 3? Y'all are over here. Table 5. Where's table 5? Y'all can go over here. Table 7. You can go over there. Table 6. Where's table 6? 6. Table 6, you can go over here. Table 9. Niner. 9. Where's table 9? Okay, can y'all go over here? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Table 4. Table 2. And last but not least, table 8. Save the best for last. Y'all can go either one. Oh, I'll get it. Yeah. Okay, enjoy your lunch, and Tim will be coming up about 12:30. So. How was that lunch? Pastor Michael made the chicken and rice. Dot made the dessert and the beans and the broccoli salad with help from a lot of people. So thank you, Michael. Thanks, Dot, as usual. I don't think that Mr. Lowry needs an introduction because he's been here a lot. So I'm going to let him carry on and take over the show. Y'all can continue to eat while he's up there. Don't throw food. Do not throw food.
Talk amongst yourselves. I got to get wired up. Which has a different connotation at the Catholic Church.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tim Lowry. I am a traveling storyteller. Today I'm traveling not only from Newington Plantation to here, but through time as well. My wife said, "Can you pick up?" I said, "Stop right there. I am not going to the grocery store dressed like this on my way back home." That's what school children want to know all the time. Is that what you wear every day? It is the 250th anniversary of the founding of the greatest nation in the history of the human race. I can say that with confidence because God told me to. Oh, soldier, soldier, will you marry me with your musket, fife, and drum? Oh, yes, good lady, but I cannot marry thee, for I have no shoes to put on. So off to the cobbler she did go, as fast as she could run. She bought him some shoes of the finest that there were, and the soldier put them on. Now, it's just a folk song. I'm not really going soldiering today, so I'm not wearing boots for the field, just a nice pair of buckle shoes. And they're rather flat, low-heeled. I don't require pumps because I'm 6 feet 2 inches tall and rival President George Washington and Mr. Thomas Jefferson in height. However, if I had a family tree that traced back to Arthur Middleton, I'd be a lot lower down, yes. And then I might need to wear some pumps. Arthur wore silk pump shoes to jack himself up a little bit. And sometimes the gentlemen would paint the heels of their shoes bright red. It was just a fashion statement. Like ladies paint their fingernails, gentlemen would paint the heels of their shoes. And then when they went downtown in all those grand cities, Philadelphia, Boston, New York, Charlestown, as they walked about, the paint on their shoes would chip off and be laying on the sidewalk. And the next morning, the innkeepers and the shopkeepers would come out and sweep the paint away and say, "Ah, yes, the gentlemen have been out painting the town red again." Oh, soldier, soldier, will you marry me with your musket, fife, and drum? Oh, yes, good lady, but I cannot marry thee, for I have no suit to put on. So off to the tailor she did go, as fast as she could run. She bought him a suit of the finest that there were, and the soldier put it on. Now, my suit is in 3 pieces, much like a 3-piece suit today, only this is high Italian fashion, which is where we got most of our fashion since in the 1770s. I'm wearing Italian moire water-barked breeches, and then of course I have on my waistcoat, and then this top coat with lots of extra fabric in the tail, for the same reason that a peacock has lots of feathers in his tail. It's attractive to the ladies, yes. My suit is modeled after Arthur Middleton's suit that is now on display in a special exhibit about fashion during the American Revolution at the Charleston Museum, only he kicked it up a notch, and he put out enough money to have hand ribbon embroidery all around the border of his coat. I couldn't afford that, but I didn't want to be too far behind. So I purchased gold braiding and then put all the contents of my purse on my coat. Yeah, in 1776, all of your silver buttoning was coin silver, which is very handy. If you sew your money to your clothing, it's harder for a thief to make off with it. And if I get into a desperate situation and I need some lovely spoons, I can cut the buttons off my jacket and have the silversmith make them into spoons, or I can have him turn them back into coin. They're very valuable. So it's a way for me to show off my wealth, to put all my money on my coat. Oh, soldier, soldier, will you marry me with your musket, fife, and drum? Oh, yes, good lady, but I cannot marry thee, for I have no hat to put on. So off to the haberdasher she did go, as fast as she could run. She bought him a hat of the finest that there were, and the soldier put it on. Now, if I were in true high fashion, underneath my hat, I should also be sporting a wig. But I am opposed to wigs, not that I'm a Baptist by any stretch, but they're just so ridiculously itchy, I've just decided not to sport a wig. But wigs came in 3 grades. There was goat hair, there was human hair, and there was yak hair. Goat hair was the lowest grade. They were very cheap and they smelled horrible if they got wet. Yes. If you called someone an old goat, you were saying that he was too cheap to shell out money for at least a decent human hair wig. And then, of course, human hair would do fairly nicely, but yak hair was the highest quality. The imported yak hair from Asia held curl better than human hair. And they used curling irons that were heated in the fire to curl the wigs. And the wigs were made on a wooden head that had been carved by a local carpenter to the same size and dimension as your head, so you didn't have to sit for hours in the wigger's shop. He would just work on your blockhead, and then you could take that home with you at the end of his process. And then, of course, I have on my tricorn hat with a cockade on the side. The cockade in those days was more a symbol of your family heritage than patriotism. Red, white, and blue would have been thought of as French, not American. General Francis Marion required all of his men to wear a solid white cockade on their hats because he was fond of conducting moonlight raids, and the white would reflect the moonlight and keep him from shooting the wrong man when he was fighting the redcoat soldiers in the middle of the night. All right, now shoes, suit, hat. Surely this man is ready to marry. Oh, soldier, soldier, will you marry me with your musket, fife, and drum? Oh, yes, good lady, but I cannot marry thee, for I have a wife of my own. Yes, make sure you ask the right questions before you start shelling out money. Otherwise, you've not made a good investment at all. Do you think it'll hurt anybody's feelings if I put this glass of water right here? Just check it. But that would be more convenient for me. If you were in a parlor in the 1770s in Charlestown, South Carolina, you might hear a conversation run thusly. Our differences are many because our origins are many. But an understanding of these many differences is required if this new country we are fashioning is to have any success upon the world scene. Sectional snobbery is already in the air. Let me explain. The women of Virginia say ladies of Philadelphia are homely and hard-favored. People of New York say Virginians live only to feast and riot. And they all unanimously agree that everyone in New Jersey is obnoxious and disliked. Let me further explain. In truth, the women of Dutch origin in Philadelphia and New York State are known more for thrift than for social refinement. However, they keep clean houses and mind their tongues, which is a virtue to be admired. And the people of New Jersey and the New England colonies and the more northern regions They are known more for bluntness in their speech than those social graces that make life so agreeable to strangers and guests. However, they fear God and they work hard and contribute to our overall success, and so we should be thankful for them. However, when it's all said and done, I choose to raise my family in the South. Now, there are those who say that traveling in the southern colonies will take one into the midst of many dangerous temptations, such as gay company, frequent entertainment, no remote pretension to true heart religion, and daily examples in men of the highest breeding of impiety, intemperance, and luxury. Such reports can be laid to envy. The mold of fashion is indisputably the South Carolinian. In dress, he apes the costume of King Charles II, it being rumored that his family tree traces back to the ill-fated Stuarts. He is never more articulate than when he is angered, and so he maintains a razor-sharp rapier tongue. However, should you upset him and he chooses to rip you up and down with it, the speech is so flowery, you would enjoy the process. If you prick his pomposity, you'll find that every ounce of blood running through his veins is a distinct shade of blue. He is celebrated justly, not only for the way he excels in speech, dining, and sport, but the way he excels all others in every social art and grace. True, the Southerner does delight in horse racing, fox hunting, bear baiting, cockfighting, dancing parties, strong drink, and Virginia weed. But all of these vices can readily be forgiven, for without him, our new country would be more appreciably gray and ordinary. When it's all said and done, the Southerner has taste. For instance, our lavish entertaining of guests is somewhat legendary. If we were at a plantation dinner in those golden ages of Charleston society, dinner would be served at 3 in the afternoon. The doors to the dining room would be thrown open wide, and as you were ushered into your seat, you would see the lady of the house ladling soup at one end of the table, while her husband carved a saddle of mutton at the other. And then serving boys would hand round dishes of poultry, pork, beef, wild game, eggs and greens, hominy grits, sweet potatoes, Irish potatoes, green beans, carrots, and a variety of seasonal salad vegetables. And all you got was a piece of a yard bird on a paper plate. And then after you had had your fill of all of that, they would whisk off the lace tablecloth to expose the damask beneath. And upon the damask, they would place down dishes of brandied peaches, iced creams, cakes, pies, plum puddings. After you'd had your fill of all of those things, they would whisk off the damask and work down to bare mahogany. We want to go to the bare table so that you can see we afford fine imported furniture from a quality cabinet maker. And on the bare mahogany, they would place down little silver baskets of raisins, figs, dried fruits, nuts. The pecan was in particular profusion, being a local variety. Make certain you understand the proper pronunciation of that particular nut. It's a pecan. A pecan goes under your bed at night. A pecan goes on your dining room table. If you confuse the two, you'll be out of social grace before a man can say Jack Robinson. After you had eaten all of these, you would never be so gauche as to push back from the table and say, Lord, I am full as a tick. Oh no, you would simply dab the corners of your mouth and say, I fear I have suffered a sufficiency. And that would be a signal for the servants to remove all the dishes and set down 2 or 3 bottles of wine, Madeira, port, sweet wine for the ladies. And after the host had toasted the ladies and they had finished a second glass, they would retire to a different room for an evening of chit-chat and sewing, while the gentlemen circulated political opinion and the bottle pretty briskly. And then everyone would reconvene about 8 o'clock at night for a light supper, a rubber of whist with a nightcap to follow. Truly, our entertaining had become legendary. In fact, it was not known only here in the low country of South Carolina. It was legendary across the pond in England as well. And so when our city fell under occupation in 1780, all the way to the middle of 1782, redcoat soldiers, particularly the officers, would often make forays outside of Charlestown to local plantations to help themselves to this hospitality. They were uninvited guests. Well, the widow Jenkins, she had a spread in rice and cotton way up the Cupper River in those days, was at home more or less alone. Her husband had died previous to the upset with King George, and she had 4 sons. 3 of them were in the field fighting for the patriot cause. Her 4th was just merely a 12-year-old lad. But she managed her farm very well, a capable woman in every respect. One evening as she was snuffing her lamps, she looked out the window, and at some distance from her home, she saw fires burning, and she realized there was a British encampment close by, and she fully expected dinner guests at the 3 o'clock hour on the very next day. And so she instructed her servants to go right ahead and prepare all of the dishes, even though she was at home alone, and they wondered why she would need all of that food, but she knew company would be there at the appointed hour. And sure enough, the very next day, just as her mantle clock was striking the 3rd hour past noon, she heard the jingle of horses' bridles and the clip-clop of hooves, and looking through her lace curtains, she saw a whole phalanx of redcoat soldiers. The New Englanders called them lobsterbacks, coming up her oak alley in those bright red coats. She, being from the low country, was unfamiliar with lobsters. She thought they looked like the very devil himself. However, she was an old Scottish Covenanter, and it would take more than the devil himself to scare her properly. She went out on the portico and greeted the men, and soon enough they signaled that they were hungry, and she, not wanting to let on that they were any burden to her whatsoever, invited them readily in to her table, which was all laid and prepared. Now, these gentlemen spoke a very fine dialect, being from England, but they obviously were not high-bred, because they turned the conversation into very dangerous territory. Everyone knows when you put your boots beneath a lady's board, you do not discuss politics or religion as you might give an occasion for offense. You mainly stick to subjects like weather and gardening and the latest fashion trends of the day. But these gentlemen started to press political issues, and one of them began to question the widow. He was probably trying to find information about the Patriots' cause. "Madam, do you have sons fighting with the rebels?" "I do not. It is the king who has rebelled against us, and not us against the king. My sons merely fight for the rights of man." Allow me to rephrase. "Do you have sons in the field with General Francis Marion?" "I do. I have 3 sons in the field, and I wish it were 3,000. Bring them home, madam. You cannot hope to achieve independence from the British crown." "I wish I were as sure of heaven as I am of independence from the British crown." "Bring them home, madam, and I shall offer them a pardon." "Shall you give them protection?" "It's enough that I offer them a pardon." "Fancy you offer a pardon when it should be the other way around. You're in the wrong, sir. It is us who will have to end up pardoning you when this is all said and done." Well, they could see they were getting nowhere with this woman. And so finally, one of the gentlemen upped the ante. Just as the servants had placed down the Madeira. "Do y'all serve Madeira to your guests?" "Yes." "No. Who was your mother, for heaven's sake?" "Yes." Everybody knows Madeira is a very fine drink because it sweetens when it's stored at a high temperature. So it's perfect for the Charleston social season. You put Madeira in a cask. It's a Portuguese, raisiny sort of wine. And you put it up in the attic. And there it cures through the 4 distinct seasons of a Charleston year. Hot, hotter, still hot, and Christmas. And then you bring it down and toast the season. Well, just as the Madeira had been poured, she was doing her best to honor these men, at least in a social way. They put their glasses down and they upped the ante and switched from politics to religion. And one of them said, "Madam, your sons are in rebellion against the King of England, and as he is head of the church, they are in rebellion against God himself." And she simply straightened her mob cap and said, "I, sir, am a Presbyterian." Well, y'all know there's no arguing with a Presbyterian. And so the men, in complete frustrations, jumped up from the table, walked outside, drew long pistols from the saddles of their horses, and shot all of her beeves standing along the fence. Beeves. B-E-E-V-E-S. It's the plural. I mean more than one cow. Yes. Yeah, if one cow is a beef, then several cows would be beeves. It's very logical if you think about it. Yes. Shot all the beeves standing along her fence and then drug the cattle into the road and stripped them of their hides so that the meat would rot in the sun and be worth nothing except to a turkey buzzard. And then they rode their horses up and down her pea patch, destroying all of her garden vegetables. And the woman would have been left destitute, except that while she was entertaining British officers within her home, her 3 sons with General Francis Marion were across the river raiding their very camp. And so all of her losses were returned to her fourfold, which is biblical for both Methodists and Presbyterians. And that was the end of that. You know, I mentioned that at these grand occasions, serving boys were handing around all the dishes. And of course, here in the colony of South Carolina and the young state of South Carolina, those boys, by and large, would have been enslaved Africans. The Africans also contributed to the American Revolutionary cause. On both sides of the battle, there were African men and women. Here in Charlestown, there were Africans who aided the British when they occupied the city. And when they finally lost the war, part of the agreements of the peace was that any enslaved African who had left their master and served the British for X amount of time, if they could register themselves in what was an official registry called the Book of Negroes, when the British evacuated the colonies, they were allowed to go with the British and would forevermore be free. And we know that there were a handful of people here in the Low Country who were registered in the Book of Negroes, and they were taken from here by the British to Nova Scotia to set up a colony. But that area was so foreign to anything they had ever experienced that eventually they became so miserable and dissatisfied that the British government paid to have many of them taken all the way back to Africa, where they established the country that we think of as Liberia to this present day. Now, during all of that migration, what was forming over all of that time here in the South Carolina Low Country was the beloved Gullah language, a silver lining on a very dark part of our local history. Now, how many of y'all are from off? Go ahead and admit it. Yes, because if you open your mouth and talk, we're going to know you're from off, so you might as well say so. All right, so for people who are from off, Gullah is a Creole language, a mixture of languages. Basically, the Africans took their African speech patterns, their syntax, their grammar from tribal languages, and imposed it on English vocabulary. But the English vocabulary, by our standard, would be very archaic. They were using words that you would find commonly in the King James translation of the Bible. And as the rest of the language evolved, they stayed right there with those archaic terms and idioms. And that's where Gullah comes from. It's always nice, before I tell you a whole story with Gullah, to give you something very familiar translated to the Gullah language. So how about Mary had a little lamb? Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow. Mary got one goat kid and got one stud color mop on top about it anyway. And everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. Every time Mary take a promulgation, the goat kid go along high, and she. It followed her to school one day, which was against the rules. That goat kid promulgated down to the house where the children learned how to set them down on top of the paper, and the teacher lady say, It made the children laugh and play to see a lamb at school. Damn children, they laugh today and know what for do, because Mary got one goat kid and got one suck color up on top about it anywhere, promulgate down to the house where the children learn how to sit them down on top of the paper, and the teacher lady say, and that be for true. Now your ear is acclimated. You could handle a whole story. I should probably pause at this point and answer this question for you. How did a tall, blonde-headed white boy learn to do that? That's chapters 1, 2, and 3 in my book. called Southern Fried Circus, available on Amazon.com, Walmart.com, and every other quality outlet where good books are sold. So it's a long, long story. But one of the places where I learned a lot about the Gullah culture, Gullah stories in particular, was from a volume called The Doctor to the Dead by Mr. John Bennett. He was a writer during the Charleston Renaissance, the years between the two world wars, when all of a sudden we realized that not only was our local culture historic, but it was utterly unique compared to any other region of the United States. And so there was a great effort to preserve Low Country culture. Toward the Gullah end of things, this is when George Gershwin wrote his world-famous opera, Porgy and Bess, which is based on Gullah culture, and he was advised by a local author, Mr. DuBose Hayward. In fact, the first libretto was written in Gullah, but when it had its premiere in New York City, the New York opera singer said, "We can't speak this. We have no idea what we're saying." And so they sort of gave it more of a standardized English approach after that. But Mr. Bennett kept company with old people. Many of the people that he kept company with had passed their 90th birthday, which meant they had been born during slave time and had lived long enough in that era, they had memories of that time. And so he would often ask them, "Do you know any of the old stories?" And they would tell him stuff. In fact, in the notes to his book, he said one of his best sources for old tales was what we would think of as a garbage man. And he said he was such a delightful storyteller, I would often ride behind his mule on his garbage cart and help him empty garbage bins just to keep him talking, and he would write down the stories. One of the stories that he wrote down from this man is in the very end of the book. And instead of being recorded in plain English, it is recorded in the Gullah language because Mr. Bennett said, "Trust me, it just won't go right if you speak it in English. It has to be Gullah or don't tell it at all." Aaron Kelly, he was dead, and they bury him. Fare ye well, Aaron Kelly. It I'ma go back to she own house. The it I'ma be the I'ma her husband but dead. She go back to she own house. She sitting there for the fireplace saying, "Woo, I hope the dead man go on while I specky in." She hoping he go on where he ain't got one. At least chance of going too. In walk Aaron Kelly looking dusty. She said, "Give, just go." He said, "You look like somebody dead, Amen. Who dead?" She said, "You dead. I buried you dead for yesterday." He said, "I ain't feel dead." She said, "You looking dead. Go back and lay in your grave." He said, "I ain't laying in no grave till I feel dead for true." And he sit down on top of a rocking chair right there in front of the fireplace, start warming his hands and warming his foots and chilling off the room. Lord. Either I'm going to go around get the preacher. The preacher come in, clap his yay upon top of Carrie, sit taught that chair there. He said, He said, "You look like somebody dead." "Who dead?" He said, "You dead. I preached your funeral last week." He said, "I ain't feel dead." He said, "You looking very dead. Go back and lay in your grave." He said, "I ain't laying in no grave. There ain't good composition in cemetery, then eh? There ain't nobody for talk to. I stay right here where there be wood, fine composition." And there he said, unravel his mouth, yak. I'm gonna have to leave a house right for. I said, "Yeah." She go around and get the undertaker. The undertaker come in, that man to bury when they're dead. He come in, he see Aaron Kelly sit on top of that rocking chair in front of the fireplace. He said, if a dead man ain't going to occupy the coffin, then we going to graft the coffin. And when they graft the coffin, the insurance ain't going to pay, and then it be the very old devil to pay himself. Ain't this a fine kettle of fish? She said, "How long you think he'll last?" He said, "In this hot time, he can't last long. He got some older. But he'll last through the hot and the cold and the dry and the wet. Oh, Aaron Kelly, he'll last. But he born be very dry. And when he rock in that chair, them bone creak and crack and pop. That creaking and cracking and popping be most bother and some." So in the amen, she go spooning, sparking round, find a young buck of a ting, and marry up. Yeah, she free from marry. Her husband be dead. He ain't lay down like it dead, but he dead, so she free from marry 2 times. She bring the young buck home. He sit there. The it amen sit there. Oh, Aaron Kelly sit betwixt them looking peevish. And then the young buck say, "How long it got to be you and me and he?" She said, "I tell him to lay down in his grave. He say he ain't feel dead for true. I be sitting. How get he lay down in his grave? But sitting ain't gonna make Sal baby no dress." Then Aaron Kelly, he say, "This ain't very jolly. Let's we be jolly. Let's we dance for limber's leg. Let's we dance for scratchy bone. And he stand up and he shake all them dry bone. They go rada, 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 rada. Now the young buck, he take a fiddle, lay upon top of his shoulder and draw the bow across them screen, make a fine fiddle tune. Old Aaron Kelly go dancing around the floor with the knee bone and knocking in the head bone and rocking him, yeah, on around. And he's go click, clacking the big yellow teeth in his head. Boom, he shuck a leg bone. Bam, go right off in the floor like that. Fiddle man say, woo. The I'm say, play on, man, play on. He play on. Oh, Aaron Kelly, he go dancing around the room with the knee bone and knocking in the head bone and rocking him, yeah, all around. And he's go click, clacking him, he got a teeth in his head, shuck another leg bone, bam, go down on his seat part. The fiddle man say, woo. She said, fiddle more faster, man, fiddle more faster. He fiddle more faster. Woo, all the rib roll around the room like barrel hoop on the floor. They ain't nary ting left, but the big ball bone head say, yak, 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 yak. The fiddle man say, oh, no, mom, I got to go get more rosin for my bow. He take a foot in his hand and here go. He ain't need no rosin for his bow. He was scared. He didn't want to see that ball bone head do what that ball bone head about to do. But she ain't scared. She take up all them bone, bury it here in the backyard, and lay them bone criss-it across and unjoined, and he ain't know how to put himself back together, so now he lay down because now he feel dead for true. I don't tell this anecdote to every audience, but because you live here, you will appreciate this. After the pandemic, I had to put my career back together. And I had not given tours as a professional tour guide in, at least 15, maybe even 20 years. But I called a tour operator and I said, if you need people, I'm looking for work. And I will re-up my tour guide license. So she sent me a questionnaire, and she said, fill out this questionnaire of all your specialties. Do you do ghost stories? Do you do tours of Patriots Point Naval Museum? Tell me what you do, and I'll know where to plug you in when people ask. So I checked on there that I could do Gullah. And she called me, and she said, you really can do Gullah? And I said, yes, I can. And she said, good, I will hire you a lot, because native Gullah speakers are hard to come by as tour guides for two reasons. One, some of them have their own companies, and so they're never available to work for me because they're running their own companies and doing their own thing. And then those that are left, there's just not enough of them to go around. I mean, we have nearly 8 million overnight visitors every year in Charleston, South Carolina. And they've all heard of Gullah and want to know more. So she said, if you're up for that, I will put you in on Gullah tours. I said, that's fine by me. I did not understand that she meant most of these tours come from the Midwest, Kansas City, Memphis, further west in Atlanta. They are all Black Americans who have come to Charleston to learn about their own heritage and where their people came from during slave time. And I step up on their tour bus at the Charleston Visitor Center and introduce myself, and 55 senior citizens, much like yourselves, go, what? And so I have to begin by explaining how in the world I came to speak Gullah. And the story ends after we spend 20 minutes right there in the Visitor Center, me making sure they're okay with me doing this. And the story always ends with God knew what he was doing. I endeavored to study the Gullah language and learn about the Gullah culture. 1, because I was a tour guide. 2, because I was a folklorist. 3, because I wanted to travel all over the United States and represent South Carolina's folk cultures, and I knew Gullah was a big part of that. But God knew that my wife and I would adopt children, and our second daughter, she'd be Gullah. And so he was getting her adoptive parents ready to help her love and appreciate her birth culture, and that would not be foreign and something she missed out on. So we do all of that, and then we go off on a tour. Well, one time I had a group from Memphis, lovely group of people, and we just went from the Visitor Center right across the street to the Charleston Museum. And I said, now we're going to go in the museum and I'll give you a guided tour, particularly emphasizing Black history and the history of slavery and all of that kind of thing. So we walk in, and I've got 55 people on the bus tour, which means 45 of them are on some sort of ambulatory device. And we get in the Charleston Museum, and the docent at the museum says, I hate to inform you, but the elevator is broken. And I said, what? I cannot carry these people one by one up 20 stairs to the first gallery. She said, no, it's not that bad. She said, if you'll just have them all walk to the back of the museum, she said, we'll take you through the storage area. And she said, we have a great big freight elevator where we move artifacts and furniture. And she said, the whole group can just get in the freight elevator and everybody goes up together. So we all get in the freight elevator, and the big gate comes rattling down. And these ladies are standing off to my left shoulder, giggling and laughing and poking each other. And finally, I turned around and I said, what? And they said, you work so hard. We could see you sweating, trying to teach us how a white person is allowed to do this. And then we get it all settled. And then we come over here to the museum and they put all the black folks in the freight elevator. And they teased me the rest of the time. They would not let up. By the time it was over, they had invited me to dinner and their next family reunion. We had a lovely day, but it was a funny moment. All of that business with the British, the way they couldn't get the best of the widow Jenkins, the way they could not get the best of these United States of America, they should have known from the get-go that it was not going to go well for them. There were over 400 engagements with the British in the colony of South Carolina. Boston, Philadelphia, and New York would not be the great success they are today without us lowly Southerners here in the southern colonies. We kept the British needled and agitated at every opportunity. And that started from the very first engagement with the British at the Battle of Fort Sullivan on June 28, 1776. I hope you are already planning to have a glorious celebration 1 week before the 4th of July. South Carolina had more or less already declared independence from King George of England. Now, there was no Declaration of Independence for the entire nation yet, but South Carolina had already let our grievances be known. In fact, we no longer referred to the leader of our state as Governor Rutledge. We called him President Rutledge because we described ourselves as the independent sovereign state of South Carolina. And we were pushing the envelope toward all the other colonies and asking them to sign on, but they were hesitant. Well, on June 28, 1776, the Declaration of Independence that had been penned by Mr. Thomas Jefferson was read by the Secretary of the Continental Congress for the first time, and then the floor was opened for comment and debate. Now, if you've seen Mr. Jefferson's picture on the $2 bill, he appears to be white-headed. That's because he allowed that beautiful document to be subjected to comment and debate. It nearly killed him. But as the men in Philadelphia debated that document, here in South Carolina, there was no more time for debate. We had been watching for over a month ships gathering on the Atlantic Ocean. There had been a year earlier, in 1775, there had been that little upset in Massachusetts, Lexington, Concord, shot heard round the world. It had been heard by everybody except King George III. And so he decided when we let our feelings be known in Charleston, South Carolina, he was going to send an entire flotilla of ships loaded with plenty of cannon, 2,500 British regulars to put this rebellion talk down once and for all. And on that fateful day, June 28, Colonel Moultrie had rowed out from a little palmetto log fort to the edge of Sullivan's Island to spy on the British fleet that was anchored on the Atlantic Ocean. And he quickly saw 9 gunships had crossed the bar and were headed toward the city of Charlestown. In the city of Charlestown, people were tearing down waterfront buildings. They were barricading doors and windows. They were prying the lead casements out of windows and donating the lead to be melted into bullets. And women and children with any means were evacuating town. They thought, this is it. We're going to be under a massive bombardment before sunset. Colonel Moultrie rode post-haste back to his little palmetto log fort, a fort that his superior officer, General Charles Lee, referred to as a slaughter pen. He thought there's no way they're going to use palmetto logs and banks of sand to repel the British Navy. But Moultrie was confident, or at least he had enough braggadocio that he was willing to go the distance. Well, eventually the ships got so close to the fort that even without a spyglass, you could see the decks of those boats crawling with redcoat soldiers. And the men inside the Palmetto log fort started to count cannon. They counted 300 great guns inside the little Palmetto log fort on Sullivan's Island that had been hastily built to defend the city over the last 30 days or so. They had 38 working guns. There were 40 in total, but 2 of them were jammed and absolutely worthless. This looked like a ridiculous situation. One of the men thought they should just run a white flag up on the flagpole and surrender before there was even an engagement. But Moultrie said that we were not going to give up the independence of South Carolina without a fight. And so he waited. Wait! What were they waiting for? If they waited much longer, those boats would be on the beach. That's what Moultrie knew. These British men were not familiar with local tides and shipping channels, and he knew they were running dangerously close to a sandbar, and if they got stuck in the mud, the decks of those guns would list right toward his fort, right where he wanted them. And so he stalled. Well, one of his men was trigger happy, you could say, and he grew tired of stalling, and he fired a single cannon shot that bounced across the bow of the flag ship. The ship was under the command of Commodore Peter Parker, the king's primary officer for this engagement. Now, Moultrie, being every inch a gentleman, immediately dispatched men in a rowboat to go and apologize to the British for starting early. And they accepted his apology and did not return fire. And so he was able to stall even further. Eventually, the British grew tired of the stall tactic, and they fired a salvo, many cannons all booming at the same time. And when the cannonballs came flying across the water and slammed into the side of the fort walls, the palmetto logs were so soft and spongy, they bounced right back off again and did no harm whatsoever. As many as 1,200 cannonballs flew over 4,000 palmetto logs and landed in the dirt behind. Our men, after a few hours, scrambled out and grabbed those cannonballs and rolled them into hot roaring fires. And very quickly they had bright red hot shot. Using iron tongs, they picked up the bright red hot shot, stuck it into the mouth of our cannons, and shot the British own ironwork right back at them. And when the red hot shot struck the side of the wooden ships, fiery splinters flew in 100 directions, and those red coat sailors went dancing around the decks of those boats like monkeys in a frying pan, yelling and screaming and carrying on. One ship caught fire, and eventually they had to abandon ship. And as soon as the Britishmen had evacuated that vessel, Moultrie sent men in a boat out to loot it of the remaining gunpowder. They even turned some of the British cannons on retreating vessels to chase them further. And eventually, when they saw the ship was going to blow, they got back into their small boats and cleared the area. And Colonel Moultrie wrote in his memoir that when the ship exploded, the plume of smoke was in the perfect shape of a palmetto tree. Obviously, I'm not the only great storyteller from South Carolina. However, he had become an instant hero, so we'll give him a bit of exaggeration. The ships were moving away. The battle had raged for about 10 hours, and Commander Peter Parker was so angry that he had been repelled by what he called those ragtag ruffians from South Carolina, that standing on the high deck of his ship, he whirled around and flipped his coattails toward our fair shores, presenting a target that was irresistible. And so we aimed a parting shot, and the cannonball went right between his knees, and the explosion ripped his pants completely from his body. He fell to the deck on his bare British backside and slid the entire length of the deck, collecting splinters as he traveled. Yes, we wouldn't want an honored guest to leave without a souvenir. He had to go down below and have the ship's surgeon attend to his wounds. By the time he was back up on deck, all of the ships had cleared the bar and were back on the Atlantic Ocean, and we were free of our enemies. Our men jumped into small boats, and they made for Shepherd's Tavern on the Charleston Peninsula. There was a dancing party and a torchlight parade, and one man said, "We should have a song. Let's sing General Washington's Doodle Song." And someone else said, "Oh, no, Yankee Doodle. That was for Bostonians. We need our own song." And so a man quickly penned, "Mr. Peter Parker had his pants blown off in the battle just today. He made such a rumpus that we shot him in the bumpus, and now he's gone away." There was a local member of a Quaker congregation who had been a conscientious observer to all of this activity on June 28, 1776, because he was a pacifist. However, he was willing to write down the song and write down a complete account of the battle, roll it up in parchment, stick it in a leather casing, and ride post-haste over several nights to Philadelphia and present the story to our founding fathers, who, when they heard about Peter Parker getting his pants blown off, a week later on the 4th of July, signed Mr. Jefferson's Declaration of Independence without any more comment, with great authority, and the rest is, as they say, history. Now, I am not wearing a timepiece. What time has it become? 1:15. What time y'all want to be out of here? All right, so we have time for one more story if you can stand it. All right, but I just fought the American Revolution and won. I win every time. And I am, as we say, headed up a bit. May I remove my coat? Thank you. You should always ask a lady before you remove your coat. People often ask historians such as myself, they say, how in the world in Charleston, South Carolina, did historic figures stand all of that clothing in the hot summertime? They didn't. They took it all off. Yeah. We are at the very end of what a Charlestonian would consider the social season. So generally the social season, the height of the season was in February, when it's nice and cool and the camellias are in bloom. And that's when you would have the St. Cecilia Society ball and all downtown. And then with what we think of as Memorial Day weekend, the social season closed. And after that, everybody put all their finery away and you tiptoed around your house in your unmentionables, which would be completely chaste in our way of thinking. I mean, women wore nightshirts down to their knees. Women had a chemise that went from their collarbone all the way to their toes. They were very covered, but that's what they would wear around the house. That's why you would call and leave your card in the antechamber or the front room, and they might deign to get dressed and receive you if you were a very serious business connection. But other than that, you'd have to wait till about October to visit again, because it was just too hot to get dressed in all of that finery. Now, we have a situation in this modern age in South Carolina. You're Somervillians. I can put a very fine point on it for you. It's called Nexton. For a long time, I could not remember the name of that development, and then I just went back to my old Kentucky roots and went, oh yeah, they've slapped up another house over there. Here comes the Nexton moving in. And then I could remember the name of that development. Now, there's a bit of an issue over there in Nexton. These people are moving in from who knows where, and they don't have a deep cultural root. They've never seen a fine pair of stockings, much less a lovely cravat. And the best they can do is they go to the flea market over in Ladson and they buy some old portraits and hang them over their fireplace, and they claim those are people from their family. We refer to them as bought ancestors. Yes. This is a problem. They're going to have to do better than that. And so I have begun a public service. I am writing a series of stories to help you make a credible connection to your bought ancestors so that you could fit in and learn our cultural ways and customs. You can do credit and bring joy to any Southerner by pointing out any other passing son of the South and simply saying, see the gentleman going there? That is Mr. So-and-so. Make sure to place the emphasis upon the pronoun, as in, that is Mr. So-and-so. And with this minor inflection of the voice on an inconsequential part of speech, you will incite the perception of prestige and power that is so intoxicating to a Southerner, and immediately watch your friend reposition himself the better to rub up against it. Now, it is true and must be admitted that there is no people group in all of these United States that is completely immune from what one might call hero worship. Even Northerners and Midwesterners have been known to venerate titans of industry, any number of Hollywood movie stars, and the occasional Motown musician. However, there is something particularly peculiar about a Southerner's penchant for the reflected glory he can receive from a close association with greatness. Rank and distinction are the dear privilege of every Southern family, and they are engaged upon at every available opportunity, even among the lower classes, which are commonly referred to as Floridians. The social ladder in every village, hamlet, town, or borough south of the Mason-Dixon line extends downward from governor to rat catcher, and every rung requires its due of deference and envy. Every Southern family works hard to establish a connection high up the social scale, even if the tie that binds is somewhat tenuous. We do love our distinctions, get them how we may, and we work them for all they're worth. This may account for some of our more colorful tales. Now, people in other parts of the country, I'm speaking mainly of the Silicon Valley, they do not appreciate a Southerner's careful consideration of a good story. They're more apt to put their faith in the efficiency of science, and they're willing to spit in a test tube and mail it off to Ancestry.com and patiently await an email informing them that indeed they are the third cousin of a distant Neanderthal known only as Bob. Every Southerner knows that a good story connecting you to greatness must give more than a modicum of decency. It must provide the listener with something of the grand and heroic, and yet be anonymous enough to never be traceable in the factual historic record. It's not that we're opposed to telling the truth. We would just never let it stand in the way of preserving the family honor. Proximity is key, whether that's 7 or 47 times removed. For instance, you may be at a social occasion where an illustrious crowd is gathered before you, such as I see before myself, and hear a Southerner casually mention, "My ancestor was there and stood as close to him as I am to you." Well, of course, such a vague utterance begs the question, close to whom and upon what occasion? Well, answers will vary, and they run the gamut, beginning with next to the Thoroughbred Secretariat in the winter circle of 1973 Kentucky Derby, all the way back to any one of the 6 Confederate generals mortally wounded at the Battle of Gettysburg. However, if you want to have a maximum amount of envy elicited from a 4 o'clock rabble gathered around you at a cocktail hour, you must establish a connection to none other than President General George Washington. For after all, he was first among Southerners and father of our entire nation. His celebrated visit to Charleston, South Carolina in May of 1791 provides ample fodder for a story that will both entertain and provide irrefutable evidence of your connection to Southern aristocracy. Let's consider how his arrival was written up in the Charleston Gazette newspaper. Now, I can tell even the folks from off have acclimated very well. I unfurled my family pedigree and no one scoffed. Yes. The President General was conveyed across the waters of the Cupper River aboard an illustriously freighted barge, rowed by 12 plus 1 oarsman representing the 13 colonies that were so recently enjoined in the battle for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These masters of American vessels were uniformly and elegantly dressed in short, light blue silk stockings, black Florentine breeches, white shirts, with blue silk bow knots done up in the fashion of elegant roses and displayed upon the toes of their shoes. Now, you could claim, if you need a bought ancestor, that one of your ancestors was one of these 13 oarsmen. You can rest assured they were 13 of the finest seamen Charleston, South Carolina could muster to honor the president as he came across the Cupper River. However, we must consider how they were dressed. I mean, they had pom-poms on the toes of their shoes. Now, if they had chosen the understated seersucker suit with foam skimmer hat, you would do no better than to establish a connection. But these men were more than a little dandified, which in conservative circles might be problematic. The mass of people was so great there was scarce room to move. The street, the windows, the balconies were beset with with spectators descending from the superannuated old age to the lisping infant, gesticulating with handkerchiefs and shouting acclamations with such a buzz of approbation that the most attentive observer could not adequately describe the spectacle. Well, now, here's a huge crowd to greet the President General. You could just simply claim, keeping it very hard to trace out in the historic record, that you descended from any number of those people who were standing around. But you need to read what they were up to. They were waving handkerchiefs and shouting. I mean, every well-bred Southerner knows we do not shout in the street, let alone, what was the word, gesticulate, whatever that might be. It just smacks of the superfluity of heathen naughtiness. Has all the trappings of an 18th century mosh pit. Now, what we need to look for an individual who provided some sort of comfort or service to the President General. At the conclusion of a celebratory dinner, the assembled dignitaries and guests drank a series of 13 toasts, every speech attended by a discharge of cannon from the Charleston Battalion of Artillery and joyous peals from the bells of St. Michael's Church. Each speaker strove to top the next, but the prize must be awarded to a local poet who wishes to remain humbly anonymous as to not detract from his immortal words. Health to Columbia's noblest son, her light and shield, great Washington. Now we're getting somewhere. We have a poet who wants to remain anonymous, so no one can ever call you a liar because they can't trace him out in the historic record. And he gave an artistically wrought rhyming couplet, which shows that he's cultured and refined, and you probably could claim him as your ancestor. However, your proclamation is not unproblematic, for everybody knows that all the great poets never married and died penniless of consumption, so how could they possibly have any descendants? You might at this point become very frustrated, but do not fear. I happen to know a story that was not reported in the Charleston Gazette. However, it is nonetheless true, and it would give you an opportunity to connect yourself to the President General. And if you don't believe this tale, then do what the young people do, Google it. And you'll find out that I am telling you the absolute truth. When Washington visited in May of 1791, the city fathers wanted to commemorate his visit with a portrait. And so they hired the leading portraitist of the day, Mr. John Trumbull, and he painted what is nearly a life-size portrait of General Washington from head to foot. And as Washington stood for this portrait, he asked him what he ought to paint in the background. Well, if you are a student of history, you know that the first half of Washington's military career was not illustrious. He lost battle after battle. But things started to turn in Trenton, New Jersey. And so he felt like that was the height of his military career, and he suggested that they paint that in the background. And so they painted the Battle of Trenton in the background. Well, when John Trumbull presented this portrait to the city fathers with the battle, and there's Washington's horse plunging and rearing at his side, the city fathers refused it. They said, "We did not want you to commemorate New Jersey. We wanted you to commemorate his visit to Charleston, South Carolina. You'll simply have to paint it again." Well, Mr. Trumbull began an entire new portrait, and this time he was careful to place the President General on Sullivan's Island, right about the location where that old palmetto log fort would have stood. He put palmetto fronds at his feet. In the distance across the river, you can see the skyline of fair Charlestown, the holy city, with St. Michael's Church steeple rising in its whiteness against a dark, stormy background. And the city fathers approved the painting and loved it very much, and they gave Trumbull $500 cash. Well, Trumbull explained that the paint needed to cure for a couple weeks in his studio, and then he would deliver it in the downtown area. And so he went back to his studio, and with $500 in one hand and his paintbrush in the other, he went back and put in Washington's horse. Only this time he turned the horse around so that its rump is facing anyone who stands to observe the portrait. Its tail is cocked at a 12 o'clock attitude, and just between its hind knees is the steeple of St. Michael's Church. That horse is about to deliver its offering on the holy city. Now, we have a rule in Charleston, South Carolina. If you see something that is inappropriate, it simply isn't there. So our city fathers declared it the finest likeness of President General George Washington ever painted, and it hangs above the dais in City Hall in Charleston, South Carolina to this very day. And that's the end of that. Now, you might say, Mr. Lowry, you started this whole final presentation saying you were going to teach us how to make some sort of significant connection to a prominent figure of Southern history. We can't possibly claim kinship to President General George Washington. Everybody knows his family tree. We can't claim that. No. You misunderstand the technique. You simply tell that story, and then you strike a pose of false humility and say, no, I did not descend from the Washingtons. My ancestor had the great honor of holding the horse and cleaning up afterward. Because everybody knows when a politician visits your city, George Washington or not, somebody has to take care of the mess he leaves behind.
Thank you, Tim. Is it on? Can you hear me? Okay. Thanks, Tim. That was really wonderful. I enjoyed that. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Next month will be June 26th, and Pat Cullinane, from who's on the board of directors for the Flowertown Players, will be here, as well as Tommy. What is Tommy's last name? Tommy Wallace, that will be here. He's a singer, dancer. If any of y'all saw Little Shop of Horrors, he played Seymour in that. So he's very, very, very talented. So thank you all so much for coming. And let me just close this out with a quick prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for your goodness. Guide us with your hand. Surround us with your mercy. And remind us that we are never alone. Amen. Thank you.